Hey guys, what the hell is this thing? So, a long time ago, a very much younger Kenneth picked up an issue of White Dwarf, and I went through the battle report for the month, and it was actually I think it was an Epic Space Marine battle report. But that battle report made reference to squiggly beasts. And I mean, I was just like, huh? What's a squiggly beast? I mean, it sounds familiar. It sounds like squid, but I mean, not familiar as well, right? Because it's a word that I didn't recognize, and I was like, I have no idea what this thing is, but it sounds kind of cool. And one of the things that it made reference to, just so you know, I'm dropping in my red mix, which is Blood Angels red with Gryphhound orange 50-50 onto the surface as a base coat for the skin. But yeah, I didn't know what it was, but it sounded familiar. And the more I read about it, it didn't really help because there was a reference to something called the drops, and I was like, squigs hang out near the drops, and I didn't understand any of it. So this was the I think it was Codex Imperialis for second edition. So this was the little booklet that came together with the core box set, which I had a copy of the Codex Imperialis for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, because I never owned the game. So I think it must have belonged to one of my friends, and I sort of ended up with it in my possession for some time. But yeah, in White Dwarf, it mentioned squiggly beasts in that battle report, and looking at the picture, squinting at the tiny image of these, like, 6 mil miniatures didn't elucidate my position any. And so I was like, okay, cool. It's some kind of a monster that hangs around with orcs. Also, I was led to believe. So it was a long time before I figured out what a squig was supposed to be, which is a bizarre creature that appears to have like either fungoid or other DNA kind of mixed in, and essentially it seems to be an inbuilt prey species that orcs rely on, which allows orcs with a K, which they kind of rely on to move from place to place. So the funny thing is this. So squigs also occur in Warhammer Fantasy, right? So I'm not sure whether this is a thing. The squigs in Warhammer Fantasy is supposed to be the same squigs that we see in 40k as well. They bear the same. They sort of bear a resemblance. I mean, they all still look like giant orc heads, essentially with these tiny little vestigial, like tails and so on. And then you've got these feet that hold them up, allows them to like jump around at alarming speeds. So yes, I'm painting a squig, and this particular squig was released with basically fourth edition Night Goblins. The really cute ones with all sorts of rude gestures and basically just really tiny. So yeah, this squig was one of a whole bunch of models that came along together with the squig hoppers. No, I'm sorry, the squig hunters. That's right. So the squig hunters were basically Night Goblin units where, at least one half of the unit or close to it was armed with prodders or similar like squig goading equipment to kind of move the squigs around. And the squigs had a tendency to just go bananas, right? Because once they got into combat, they would do fine until such time that they failed the break test, in which case they would go wild. And that would mean that squigs are leaping in every single direction, doing damage to anything that they hit. And that's just such a wonderful image, that the idea that a creature that frequents the drops, which I later found the drops are toilets, which is a horribly graphic way to name a toilet, but it kind of does make sense, right? Stuff does drop, if I'm to be honest. So yeah, these are toilet dwelling fungoid cave beasts. There is another sort of like backstory that occurs in Rogue Trader, I believe, where essentially orcs had some members of their clan captured by the Tyranids. Unless I'm mistaken, the Tyranids like whisked them away, and then conducted horrible experiments on them to create new genetically altered minions. And the creature that they ended up making was essentially what was the which was to become the Ripper Swarm kind of later on, which is Tyrannid squigs. And unbelievably, the orcs eventually, in a skirmish with the Tyranids, recognized the genetic lineage of these like altered beasts and decide to mount a rescue mission to try to liberate their DNA from the Tyranids and end up liberating a whole bunch of squigs. And essentially, over time, those squigs that were liberated eventually integrate into the orc species, which is why orcs have squiggers, orcs have squig catapults, which fire buzzer squigs, orcs wear hair squigs, orcs with a K, I'm afraid. Yep, 40K. With like buzzer squigs, with gnasher squigs, hair squigs that they wear in place of like beards and so on. So yeah, squigs are a bizarre thing, and they're kind of awesome because there are very few, in my opinion, truly original things in 40k, and squigs are one of them, and therefore, squigs should be celebrated. I feel. No other fantasy setting that I'm aware of has a subservient slave race, or well, not slave race, but subservient kind of built-in prey species. Later on, there is a narrative about the old world. No, not the old world. Sorry, the Brain Boys, which were the distant progenitor species that apparently created the orcs genetically in a lab somewhere. That orcs are only dimly aware of via their inherited ancestral DNA. And the story goes that orcs believed that the Brain Boys created squigs in order that they would have essentially a food organism that they could bring with them from planet to planet, so they will always be essentially self-sufficient. And that's what a squig or a squiggly beast is supposed to be. I'm like, sure. Look, the origin stories for squigs are just wonderful, and there is such a breadth of creativity and originality in these like strange animals, strange creatures, that they really do bring a lot of like character and a lot of uniqueness to the Warhammer world, both 40k and fantasy. So I'm all for it. I really like this aspect of culture, so to speak, for the orcs, because it's just mad enough, right? Like it's bizarre and it's kind of weird and new, but it's also recognizably 40k. It's just madcap enough to be that special, unique mix of weird traits. Okay, so this guy's a little bit damp. I'm planning on doing a highlight for him next. After our initial coat of Blood Angels Red plus Gryphhound Orange 50/50, but I kind of want to dry him off before I get started. Also, there are his awesome teeth, which I want to start base coating as well. So I'll be back in a second, yeah? Okay, we're going to jump right in with the highlights now, that this boy is now properly dry. And so this is a combination of Vallejo Clear Orange with Vallejo Vermilion and a little bit of Ice Yellow to just really punch it up a little bit. So the reason why I use so many colors when formulating my highlights is because I think it's a fine line to tread when you work with red. That if you add too many colors to it, it kind of loses its essential character, or you add too much volume of your whatever color you're adding as a highlight. So you have many options, of course. You could add like a yellow, you could add just straight up orange, which is a mix of red and yellow, right? But of course, when you get it out of a pot, it can have many variations of mix. And sometimes it's just a good idea to have different colors to kind of play around and to try to achieve that perfect blend of pigments in order to get your squig looking nice and appealing. But at some point, you're going to probably have a problem with the squig looking a little, or rather whatever's red part that you're painting, looking a little bit too faded and a little bit too washed out. And I think that's usually the point where you want to try to come back in with a wash of the red that you started with in order to kind of blend everything together again and to make sure that it doesn't look too washed out and faded and chalky. So the mix that I'm using here is composed of 3 colors as a result of that, because I like to adjust the color as I go along. But broadly speaking, any orange would do. Any even adding yellow directly to the red would work. It really comes down to your workflow and what you personally prefer. Truth is, so long as your red is suitably present on the surface in large enough amounts that the overall miniature looks red still, you're probably going to be okay. No matter what you add to the surface, bear in mind that there are 2 colors that you could potentially end up with. One is a very light orange if you end up adding a lot of white and yellow to the surface, or if you add a lot of ice yellow, which is I guess you could call it a yellow and white mix, you could end up with something that looks a little bit more like flesh. So be sure to kind of play around with the proportions and make sure that you get something that you're happy with. I'm not saying either of these mixes is ideal, but I kind of like for squigs to go for something that's a little bit more fleshy in the final outcome, simply because I think it suits the shape really well. I've in the past painted squigs with a highlight that's pure orange, and what I found is that it kind of ends up looking a little bit artificial, a little bit too bright for what it is that I'm trying to create, which is an organic, like leaping tomato monster. So yeah, be sure to experiment around a little bit and just have fun with it, because it's actually okay in my opinion if your squigs are kind of different shades of orange as well, simply because, well, I mean, they're a horribly gene spliced, genetically modified creature. Kind of okay if they have unusual colors, right? So we're rapidly reaching the point where our orange is, or red highlight, sorry, is starting to become a little bit fleshy, and I really like the look of this, the sort of like realism. I think our eyes understand that there is a little bit of fleshiness in this color, and I think that looks great. So highlighting around the mouth, because the mouth is the feature area of the front, and on the back we're going to be fairly subdued. We're just going to draw attention a little bit to these larger wrinkles and kind of have them gather in intensity around these 2 horned protuberances. It's a fancy way of saying that they stick up from his head. They protrude from his head like some strange horned potato. And that looks kind of, I don't know, kind of special and unique and different. And so back to the story about when I first discovered what a squig was in the pages of Codex Imperialis. When I looked closely at the actual creature, I couldn't at first work out what on earth I was looking at. And then one fine night, I ended up watching on rerun television in Singapore this film called Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. And I was like, oh, that's what they were trying to go for. Because I didn't know, because orcs are green, right? Orcs are famously green. So if you were constructed by the Tyranids using orc DNA, I would have imagined that you would have been green, right? I guess there are plenty of reasons why the Tyranids might not be making green squigs. One of which is, well, the Tyranids themselves hail from a red star, right? A galaxy orbiting a red star. And the story goes that their own skin is red. So presumably anything that includes Tyranid DNA on some level is supposed to be at least partially red. That's one justification, I suppose. But also because I think red just simply is a wonderful complement to the color green and really helps these bizarre beasts stand out, as they should. They really do deserve pride of place as probably one of Games Workshop's only like original creations, other than say the Skaven. But then again, everybody knows that Skaven are effectively like, I mean, there are a million and one fantasy stories like Red Wall, right, where Skaven are a thing, where mouse-like people are a thing, and the Skaven do really resemble the bad guys, the rats, I guess, or the weasels. I'm not sure what those creatures are from Red Wall. So they, but yeah, one of the few original Games Workshop creatures. Therefore, yeah, I believe they should take pride of place, and they're adorable. They are too cute for words. So I'm gonna go back to a bit of the red mix, and I'm gonna wash a little bit to kind of trim back some of the highlights that I've put on, using our mix of clear orange, vermilion, which is the red color by the way, and ice yellow. And I'm going to just trim back some of these highlights and help them blend in while reinstating some of the red color, because I didn't want it to be too washed out and indistinct. And I think that looks pretty good, especially on the upper area of his lips, you know, where that little spot is just below the nose, and then around the horn. Cool. So the lower lip, as I'm sure you've caught earlier, I put a little bit of my human flesh tone, or rather my sort of like pale skin tone, medium pale skin tone, and this is Guilliman Flesh plus Seraphim Sepia. So now we're going to go for another mix. I'm going to grab some Gryphcharger Grey, and I'm going to mix in a little bit of Skeleton Horde, because I want to do the teeth in a kind of desaturated tone. The teeth are very big, all right? They're kind of like occupying like at least 2/3 of the front of its head. So in order to make them a little bit less, make the model a little less brown toned, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a little bit of I mixed a little bit of Gryphcharger Grey into the Skeleton Horde, because that gives me something that looks a little bit more desaturated, something a little bit cool looking. Cool as opposed to warm colors are a good way to sort of draw attention to parts of the model that you want to draw to. I generally try to avoid making an entire model either warm colored or cool colored, but try to play back and forth between the two, so that we can, you know, appropriately draw attention to one area versus another. So that's the teeth. But for the actual horns, I think I want to keep those in pure Skeleton Horde. So there is this bit of a distinction that I want to draw between the teeth and the horns, because I think it helps us to visually separate the two when we look at the model. And I just like the idea that, you know, the horns are kind of more warm visually, whereas the teeth are kind of cold and dangerous looking. So I'm just coming in with my finger to take off a little bit of extra contrast, because the shape of the horns is just perfect to allow me to do that. And then after that, I'm going to come back in with a little bit more Skeleton Horde, too much on the brush, a little bit of Skeleton Horde to do his nails on his feet, on his little feetsies. And just like that, we are done with the base coats for the entire model, as far as I can tell, with the exception of the tail. Now, so this model so far is overwhelmingly red, right? So I wanted a little place where I could sort of emphasize that orc lineage, if I could. So I'm cleaning it up now with a little bit of Vallejo Silver Grey, which is my go-to color for cleaning up splashes that of paint that get onto my undercoat, which is also basically the same color, but from Pylox, which is a spray can brand Nippon paint, right? So what I'm going to do is I am going to drop a little bit of green there, because I think that just makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. So the color that I will use is Scorpion Green, which is the color that I use on most of my orcs. So I want to draw a direct link between the orc DNA that's clearly in this weird fungoid beast. And yeah, maybe this is one part of the model where orc DNA didn't quite combine well with the Tyranids DNA. And yeah, I mean, that tail kind of looks like tacked on and different anyway, so I thought it would be good to add a little bit more interest to that. The other thing I want to do is to grab a little bit of my silver grey, Vallejo Silver Grey, and put that onto this bandage. So he's got a pair of bandages on the back, adhesive bandages, just like some cartoon thing. So that's kind of awesome, right? So that's one thing that these models have that I really appreciate, which is he's so cute. And then these little funny cartoony touches add a little bit of extra humor to it. I mean, it's just such a weird place for that to happen as well. That little injury. Cool. The next thing we want to do is to grab a little bit of Vallejo Ice Yellow, and I'm going to try to pop it into his eyes because there are the tiniest little eye beads inside his eye socket. So switching to a smaller brush to make this process just a little bit easier. Grab a tiny amount of ice yellow. There. And there. That's terrifying. It was starting to run away a little bit for me. But I think I managed to get it. Cool. Right. So now that the horns are dry, I want to jump back in with a slightly larger... Woohoo! Escaping bottle. I'm going to just jump in with a little bit of silver grey again for the teeth. And I'm going to start drawing striations at the apex of each tooth, as well as the bottom of the upper ones. I think adding striations on teeth kind of adds a lot of personality and texture to each one. And the reason why I'm not going straight to white immediately is because I get to make it a little bit more subtle by keeping the white to a second stage highlight. So broadly, if you can't get multiple striations on the teeth, just do like a V shape the way I'm doing it now. I find that, yes, it's nice to have the striations, but there's no real need to overdo it as well. Some of these actually just get only one, and in my opinion, that's fine. What you don't want is for every tooth to look exactly the same. And then that basically makes them a little bit more organic and unique. And you can sort of see that doing this stage gives a lot more additional texture to the mouth area. And since it's such a large feature, it kind of needs the little bit of extra punch to draw attention to it. So now I'm moving on to pure white, and this time I'm only focusing on the bottom or top, as the case may be, 1/3 of each tooth. To really emphasize the point where, well, the point really, or the place where these teeth come together and intersect. Okay, so I think the trick is to not cover too much. Of each tooth with this, because we want to sort of draw attention to the sharp points, the business end of each of these, rather than do a general kind of highlight. Simply because we want this part to look the most dangerous, and we want to emphasize it suitably. Cool. Now we can do the same to the horns as well. Since we already wiped off a little bit of the highlight earlier, a bit of the contrast paint earlier, we're just going to focus on the very tip of this, and that should be just fine. Cool. Now a little bit of green, the same scorpion green that we used earlier for the area at its tail. We're just going to wash over the ice yellow just to give a slightly green cast to the eye. And then we're going to grab some Ildari Emerald to shade the parts of the tail that come really close to the rest of the body. And I think our squig is looking decent. So I just want to refine the highlights on his teeth a little bit more because I think some parts got a little bit muddy. So just coming in to sort of clean up some of the highlights. Add a little bit of refinement to the shapes. And I've said this like lots of times before, but try to make sure that the highlights that you place down have a kind of spindle shape to them because that helps them blend into the adjacent color a lot better. And yeah. So, squigs, ladies and gentlemen, wonderful things. If ever you get a chance to paint anything from this range, from the Orc and Goblin range, or from the Night Goblin specifically, squigs are a perfect model to add. They are so much personality, so much character, and they're so adorable. You get to see lots of squigs these days. There've been all manner of different types of squig designs, but these really old ones from second edition, I do still treasure a bit because they're so like iconic and specific. There's a whole range of these guys, and I can't wait to get more of them done. So a little bit more of a highlight onto that lip, and I think we should be in a good place. So specifically, I am going to add some vertical striations onto the mouth. There was a little bit of red on that left side, and I left it there on purpose because I think it helps us connect one end of the mouth to the other. You can see there's a little bit of red on the right side as well, so that kind of works just fine once you add your highlight. Okay, that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed watching me paint this guy, and I hope if you ever get a chance to paint a squig yourself, go right ahead and do it. They're so much fun to do, not too difficult, lots of personality, very few colors, and they're a great time if you want something to just, relax over. Cheers, guys. Have a good one. Love you all. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff if you're inclined to or if you enjoyed this video. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.